Shelia Weinberg, thank you for joining us again on the Illinois channel. It's been a while since we've spoken, and we have not touched base with you since the coronavirus has shut down both the national government and so much of the state economy. I wanted to go to you often for what your organization is about, the truth in accounting. And let me, before we get into some of the details about Illinois, this is something, viewers, that we took off of Sheila's site just moments ago, and it shows how the U.S. Has the national debt currently at $25+ trillion, but Sheila's accounting, her organization, says the truth is that there's over $124 trillion in U.S. national debt, and that each taxpayer's share is $806,000. And Shelia, that goes to the very point of your organization, which is to say that the government often is hiding the severity of the debt that they are incurring and the spending because they don't follow normally accepted accounting rules. So let's start with you giving us an overview. Since the shutdown began, the governor's been having daily press conferences. Have you watched some of those? And if so, what is your reaction to some of his comments?
Well, my big takeaway, since I'm concerned about the finances of the state of Illinois, is that he continually claims that, under his budget, it was balanced. And it was far from balanced. We calculated it was at least $4 billion short. They were running a $4 billion deficit when he was saying that the budget's balanced. The difference is kind of like if my credit card company said, Shelia, you need to pay a minimum of $1,300 on your credit card every month. And I decided, well, I'm a little bit short, so I'm only going to pay $900. That is what the governor's doing. But I would claim that my budget's balanced, even though I shorted the minimum payments on my credit card. The governor's, the state actuaries of the pension plans say that $13 billion should have been put into the plan, and the governor and legislature chose to only put $9 billion in. So his balanced budget is actually out of whack by at least $4 billion. And we think that this, causes citizens, even people in Washington, people around the country, to have a false view of the state's finances. And at Truth in Accounting, that's what our whole focus is, to try to get the true information to the citizens.
I'm going to bring up a graphic that you sent us, and this goes to show that you are not giving Illinois a passing grade. Why don't you give us some, if you can, hopefully you can see this, and if so, go ahead and give us some information on what we're looking at here.
Yeah, for the last 10 years, we have done a financial state of the states, calculated each and every government's true financial condition. And the reason we had to do that was because the governments were not putting on their pension and retiree healthcare liabilities. Find that the state of Illinois, even despite that they have balanced the budget for decades, is $226 billion in the hole. That works out to be about $42,000 per taxpayer. That's about per household, and we give them a grade of F.
And another graphic I'll bring up, and it has to do with how much money is available to be paid. And as we can see here, and you can go ahead and comment, Shelia, but obviously as we go from left to right, the money available to pay needed bills has gone down.
Yeah, since 2009, since we started calculating this, Illinois' what we call money needed to pay bills has continually decreased down and down and down. The large part of this is again, if I don't pay even the minimum on my credit card, the balance is going to continue to increase, which will make me further and further in debt. And Illinois continues to do that, continues to play what we call political math to calculate how the budget's balanced. They can balance the budget by borrowing money. They can balance the budget by not paying their bills. They can balance the budget by not funding their pensions correctly.
And then we have this one, which goes to show the taxpayer burden it says taxpayer burden or surplus, and this is a little hard to read at the bottom. I'll point out, as the other one, this is a 10-year chart. It begins in 2009, so we can see things have not gotten better over the last decade.
Is what we do is we take the money needed to pay bills, we divide it by the number of taxpayers in the state. That number is the number of people who have filed federal income taxes and had a federal tax liability. So those citizens in Illinois who meet that criteria are we call a taxpayer. We divide the money needed to pay bills by that taxpayer amount to get a taxpayer burden. This amount, besides a mathematical number, represents the amount of future taxes that a taxpayer is going to be burdened with, and they are not going to receive any government services or benefits for those tax dollars.
As we tape this, I'm going to tell people, my son just yesterday arrived in Miami, where he's beginning a new job. He's 30 years old, and I'm sorry to say on one hand that he was excited to go to Florida and get out of Chicago, because frankly, he was just telling me he just didn't see a future in Chicago, in part because of all this. And it's not new. We have heard that for, I think it's something like the last 7 years or so, the state has been losing population, and especially true among people like my youngest son, the millennials, who are opting to go to other places because they're listening to all the experts who have crunched the numbers and how much debt there is. And so many of these people who are young students also have all this student financial debt, and they're thinking, we don't need to be having all of this property taxes going higher and higher, to be paying pension costs that are out of whack, and then all the other state spending that's going on. And I suppose the other thing that I would say, and I'll have you comment, that why states should be running even I would even argue a surplus that you could put into a rainy day fund, is because things are going to happen out of the blue, as we have right now, this coronavirus. And so the politicians might be saying, how are we supposed to know? You're supposed to know because for the same reason all of us drive with a spare tire in the trunk, because we know things can go wrong.
Well, as Terry Savage says, you should have chicken money set aside, and this is money, or some people say, 3 to 6 months of your income should be set aside. Why are state and local governments different? They, instead of going to the federal government for money, they should have these rainy day funds. Now, again, the governor in his press conferences say that they were putting money aside in the rainy day fund. Well, the governor, yes, he was technically going to put money aside in the rainy day fund. It was $100 million. That is less than 1 day's worth of spending in the state of Illinois. So yeah, he was putting money aside, but it wasn't the 3 to 6 months or even the 5 to 10% that is recommended for state and local governments. And if you think about all of this with this virus, yes, it's a crisis, but as you say, you should plan for this crisis. And if citizens are going to go to the government, the state government or the federal government, they should be expected to pay higher taxes or take less services in the past in order to have a rainy day fund, in order to have the governments to have money set aside. If in Illinois, we can't even balance our budget, much less run a surplus. And the state of Illinois, plus other governments, have the opportunity to get money from the Federal Reserve, which is going to be a short-term loan of like 3 months. My prediction is Illinois will never get rid of that. Even though it has to be paid off in 3 months, Illinois will have to borrow money elsewhere or fund their pensions even less, or other services, cut other services to repay this money. So I think that if the state of Illinois takes that money from the Federal Reserve as a loan, even though it's a short-term loan, that amount of debt will be on the state's books forever, and citizens will be paying taxes on it, interest on it forever.
One of the things we have going for us as a country right now is that we have record low interest rates. Sheila, the governor or the president was mentioning, as far as borrowing right now, that you're almost borrowing for free. I would suppose, if, as far as the infrastructure that we need to rebuild, as far as water projects or highways and that kind of thing, the president wants to spend approximately $2 trillion. That we've had such high spending bill. Just the other day, the U.S. House passed a $3 trillion bill that I don't think is going to go anywhere. Even if it were to pass the Senate, which it won't, the president, I don't think, would sign it. But that said, is there any silver lining here, aside from making our viewers more depressed about how deep of a hole we're in? Do you have any prescription as far as anything that could be done in a positive vein that might actually work?
Well, if the federal government decides to give the state and local governments money, in essence, bail out the state and local governments, what I would recommend is they calculate they know how much revenue they received in 2019. We set that as the baseline. And then any shortfall because of the virus, the federal government would give the states money. But again, you saw our debt clock at the beginning. It's $25 trillion is what they're reporting. If you include Social Security and Medicare promises, you're at $124 trillion. And this debt will just add to that. And keep in mind that in 2019, we paid $400 billion just on interest on the debt. That's more than we spent on education, more than the federal government spent on the State Department. I think it was 10 departments I had to add up just to get to the interest amount. So this interest, again, if you're talking trillions, the interest is in the billions, which to me is a lot of money. I don't know about you, Terry, but to me it's a lot of money.
Well, $400 billion in interest. It's been a while since I looked. I believe the interest payments on the national debt, which is part of the annual operating budget, is now about 7%. You correct me if I'm wrong. The other thing is we have what the so-called entitlement programs, that's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Those add up to approximately 63% of the budget. So when you add in the national debt payments, about 70% of the federal budget are payments that are growing on automatic pilot. All these other functions of government, aside from the Pentagon, only the Veterans Affairs, the national parks, the Commerce Department, transportation. All of those only add up to 19% of the federal budget. So even if we wiped out all of those and didn't spend any money and fired all those employees, we're still going to have a heck of a time trying to balance the federal budget. The other thing I would say to the state people, and sooner or later all this is actually going to matter. I can go back to when I was a child and my dad used to be talking about this, and the national debt, and he used to tell me they'll never pay it all back, and then it was only a fraction of where it is today. But we're also looking at the growth of these programs as people increasingly, the baby boomers get on Social Security. But what I wonder is, at what point are we going to have a sovereign debt problem? And in light of this coronavirus, we have shaky economies before it, of Italy, of Spain. Japan is the #3 economy in the world. They have higher debt than the United States, as does China, and they're the #2 economy. So I don't know if you look at any of that from an international standpoint of how we could have, we might have what's called a sovereign debt, where actually countries go bankrupt.
Yeah, and what you have to look at is, in addition to, just the mind-boggling amount that they're borrowing now. I think the deficit for last month was $1 trillion. When at our truthinaccounting.org, you showed our debt clock, I had to have my team reset that and have it start spinning faster because it was it was going too slow. These debt amounts are just unconceivable. And when it ends, we don't know when it will end. It will be, it will be bad. We are all already having bad effects where you're spending so much money on interest. And also, one of the former Defense Department guys said that the national debt was the biggest national security issue that we have. Think about it. If we go to China and say, well, China, we have determined, that you caused the virus. Let's just use that as a bad example. Well, and China says, well, maybe we did, maybe we didn't, but we really want you to get off our backs, because if you don't, we're going to stop lending you money. China already has more than $1 trillion of our debt. So, we can't now. What happens when you have such large debt is, instead of being an economic might, we must be more of a military might. And so we're having to put soldiers in harm's way, where in the past we might have been able to use some of the economic levers in order to get countries to be more peaceful. This we have to almost use economic might to do that.
The thing I was going to say, and I failed to mention when I was talking about the federal government, and the point here is that, folks, even the federal government, we talk about Illinois running out of money and being overextended, but even the federal government's getting to that point. And where Shelia and I were just talking about the fact that the payments on the national debt, which have increased dramatically over the last decade, constitute about 7%, and as Shelia mentioned, about $400 billion in annual spending just in interest. I would remind you that we are currently paying record low interest payments, and the normal rate of interest is about 4 to 8%. If you go back over the last 75 years, the average interest payments 4 to 8%. Those interest payments, if we go back to where as our interest starts to increase, our spending on the national debt will explode and crowd out, just as pensions at the state level crowded out spending. Interest payments are going to crowd out a lot of spending. And already we have about a $5 trillion federal budget, annual budget.
Yeah. And, in addition to the federal treasury, you also have to look at the Federal Reserve, who, when they're giving this money to the states for their loans, they are in essence printing that money. They don't have that money sitting around, so they're printing that money, which makes everybody's dollar worth a little bit less. So when you're buying bread, you have to spend more of your dollars to buy that. As the Federal Reserve continues to print money, and they're already printing $435 billion, I believe, for these state and local governments. And how are the state and local governments going to pay that money back? So it's all this debt is not a good thing. What the American people have done is made the federal government a huge insurance company. And if you think about an insurance company, an insurance company will give you insurance policy for revenue. Something happens and you lose your revenue. You can have an insurance company to stopgap that.
I have up there, just as people can see again, we have $124 trillion is the actual national debt. Because why is that, Shelia? Is that because they don't include Social Security and some of the long-term pension obligations?
Yeah, they do not.
The federal government?
Yeah, the federal government, to my shock, does not believe that Social Security and Medicare is a liability of the federal governments. They don't believe that they owe anybody any Social Security or Medicare benefits beyond the checks that are currently written. Well, I think if you went to the American public and said, do you think that the federal government owes nobody any Social Security and Medicare benefits? I think you'd get a different answer from the public. So we include those numbers as debt In accounting, back to us accounting, to be a debt, it has to be probable that you're going to pay it, and it has to be estimatable. And we believe Social Security and Medicare meet that criteria. But, getting away from the numbers, getting away from the math, we just, want the citizens to understand the true financial condition of their governments so that they can knowledgeably participate in their government's finances, or even who to vote for. If you have a governor saying our budget's balanced, well, then the citizens of Illinois have assumed that everything was fine. They might have voted for a certain party or not for a certain party based on that information. And if they knew the truth that the state budget wasn't really balanced, would that have changed their voting decision? If revenue would have had to been increased to make up for the shortfall, would that have changed a voting decision? Or if other things had to have been cut, would that have changed a voting decision? Well, people didn't get the true information to be a knowledgeable voter in the voting booth. And that's why we're trying to get the truth out on the federal level and also on the state level.
And the governor has his constitutional amendment, proposed constitutional amendment, will be going to the voters to have a progressive tax. I don't know if you've taken a position again on that. And if so, let's just say this. Has the impact of the shutdown, obviously it's damaged revenues to the federal and the state. Is the governor's prescription to have a progressive tax even more needed now, or is it something that now is the wrong medicine given where we are?
Well, it might be a double whammy of that. If the governor, let's say he is correct that, we need this progressive income tax to raise more revenue. Well, the federal government, what if they give them a bailout? Then will he back off and say, we don't need this progressive income tax for revenue? Truth in Accounting doesn't take a position on tax policy. We just want the accounting done correctly, so some people would say that a progressive income tax will cause even more people to leave the state. Like your son, I can see why he left Chicago. We just issued at our data-z.org website, we issued the combined taxpayer burden, looking at if you lived in the city of Chicago, how much is your debt, but how much is your debt also for Cook County, CTA, CPS, and for the state. And that all adds up to $122,000 per taxpayer. Again, that is the amount that a taxpayer living in the city of Chicago is going to pay in future taxes to the state, to the school district, to the CTA, and to the county. And they're not going to receive any tax services and benefits for those tax dollars. So again, are we making the climate
rather than just make our viewers suicidal here? Is there anything that can be done? I mean, I guess the old prescription is you have to have more revenue and less spending. So I mean.
Well, we would say the very first step is let's go ahead and be honest with the citizens. Let's go ahead and say, even if you calculate the Constitution has a crazy, very slippery way that you can, quote, balance your budget. But let's go ahead and be honest with the public. If the governor says, again, we balanced our budget or we have balanced our debt, well, how much did your, quote, structural deficit go up? How much did your pensions go up even though you balanced your budget? How much money did you borrow? And the first step is let's be honest with the citizens and let them know whether the budget was truly balanced or not truly balanced. That would be our first step.
Shelia Weinberg, there's so much to talk about. I know you also look at other states. Is there any reason why, is Illinois doing things worse than other states, or is it just that other states are as bad as Illinois?
No, we only have one state in our study that is worse than Illinois, and that is New Jersey. So, Illinois, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, they're playing, using political math to calculate their budget. Revenue should not be included loan proceeds shouldn't be included as revenues. You shouldn't be able to borrow to balance your budget. You should have to pay your bills when you're balancing your budget, and you should fund your pensions properly. And Illinois routinely does not do that. They didn't have, they had less than $100 million of a rainy day fund set aside. They're just not making good financial decisions. And as our money needed to pay bills and as our taxpayer burden shows, it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse.
Well, we have your website up there. People can get a lot of information off the truthinaccounting.org website. We just grabbed a portion of what's there so they can certainly educate themselves. And Shelia, unfortunately, we always fight the clock, but we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us, and hopefully we'll have at the least better accounting in state government, and the voters will have more information at their fingertips to make informed decisions. So we thank you for joining.
Yeah, and they can also go
ahead.
They can also go to our website and sign up for something called Morning Call. I believe you get it, Terry. It's a daily email that has federal, state, and local government budgeting and accounting stories. So go to our truthinaccounting.org website. Thank you, Terry, so much for having me on.
Thank you again. Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.